Hello! It's been a while. I put a couple of videos together, but for some reason it just didn't feel right. So I deleted them and started doing a new collection of videos, which should be much more helpful. In this collection, I'm going to show you how I work with Next.js using the recommended app router and TailwindCSS. It's all front-end, but broken down into useful components so that you can take what you need and build out the website or web platform that you have in mind. The idea is you can learn the basics of Next.js and TailwindCSS and use these individual components as starters for your project, not only this one, but also future projects. To ease our way into it, let's start with the header and footer. Very easy, very important. I'll throw in how I do the light-dark mode toggle as well. Let's begin. npx create next app at latest space full stop. The full stop is so that it uses the existing parent folder that I have here. If you don't have a parent folder already, you can just do npx create next app at latest, which will then ask you for a project name. Then yes to TypeScript, yes to ESLint, yes to TailwindCSS, yes to source directory. Although it's not strictly needed for this series, I selected yes out of habit, but you decide what you want to do. App router, yes. No need to customize default import alias. All right. We'll wait for that to load. And as I'm cleaning everything up, I'll just do a quick run through of the app router in case this is your first time seeing the app router folder structure. We've got our node modules and public folder at the top. This is the same as without the app router. Then in our source folder, we have an app folder. The first difference you'll notice is that the favicon file now lives in the app folder. Great. We don't really care where that lives, right? Then we have global CSS, a layout file, and a page file. Very interesting. I say very interesting because before the app router, we would do our own layout files within a components folder, if you remember. Now one is prepared for us. And it looks like they combined the _app and _document file into this one layout file and tweaked the way that we're doing metadata. All fantastic. And then instead of our index file, it's now called page. This is quite important because the pages folder used to be how we have our individual web pages, right? That folder is gone and we have a page file instead. How does that work? You'll see in the next video, but for now, let's keep that in mind. And think of this particular page.tsx file as our homepage and what used to be the index.tsx file. At the moment, nothing is different apart from the file name, but do not change the file name. In our layout file, let's change the metadata first. The title is what will appear on the tab, so we want something concise, like that. And the description can be learn Next.js Tailwind by components. If we do npm run dev, you can see that the tab name is our metadata title and the page is a white canvas. Earlier, I did a pure CSS version of what we're going to build. So the pure CSS is on the far left of the screen. Bottom right is what the pure CSS version looks like. That's what we'll be building. Top right corner is our Next.js project, where we will translate the pure CSS into TailwindCSS, so you can see exactly how TailwindCSS works. The pure CSS file will only be here for the header and footer for this initial comparison. You'll get how pure CSS translates into TailwindCSS really easily, so we won't need the pure CSS example going forward. But it's here if you've not really used TailwindCSS before. All right, let's start. The logical first step is to get the skeletons on the canvas, right? So in our Next.js project, let's create a components folder. In our components folder, we'll have a file called header.tsx. In it, we'll return a header tag with a div tag nested inside. In the div tag, we have a link tag, which is the Next.js equivalent of an A tag. In the middle, we have a subscription form. I added this here because this seems to be a popular trend now. Either an email collection form or a search bar sits in the header. We're going to use a flex container as well, so this will help us to get used to how to position items within a flex container. Whether you have a subscription box or a search bar, the front end is the same. It's a form with an input field and a button inside. And lastly, a nav tag with a button saying sign in. If you only need a sign in button, you don't even need the nav tag. The button is enough. But you may want to have other things there, like a menu potentially, or a light dark toggle. So I've just kept it inside the nav tag for now. And to see what we have so far, we can add our header component into our layout file like this. If we run it, npm run dev, you can see our very plain texts sitting right there. To make it clear that this is the Next.js and Tailwind project, as opposed to pure CSS, let's add a title saying Next.js Tailwind components. We can make it big and clear by specifying text for Excel, font bold, and written in uppercase. Now this looks very similar to our pure CSS text. That's really Tailwind CSS in a nutshell. Series complete! See you next time! Just kidding. Let's decorate the header. In pure CSS, the header has a padding of 16 pixels top and bottom, which we can interpret as the y-axis, aka the vertical, and 24 pixels left and right, which we will interpret as the x-axis, aka the horizontal. So in Tailwind CSS, this will translate to px, short for padding along the x-axis, -6. 6 is the Tailwind CSS equivalent of 24 pixels. And py, which means padding along the y-axis, is 4, which is equivalent to 16 pixels. Border bottom can be depicted as border-b in Tailwind CSS. And the Tailwind border default color and thickness works pretty well, so I'll just leave it. You'll be able to see how to adjust the border color later on. And should you need to adjust the thickness, you'll see it in the next video. Or have a look at the documentation, which is also how I knew 16 pixels was 4 and 24 pixels was 6. It's all in the documentation. Now, in our div, this is our flex container. We have a maximum width of 7XL. This sets the maximum width of our container to about 75 rem. MX auto simply means margin left and margin right are set to auto. So our container can sit comfortably in the center instead of leaning to the left. I like to add this for responsiveness because without it, when your browser size changes, the text will just go to the very edge of the screen, right? No matter how wide your screen is, it will just always go to the edge. On smaller screens, sure, it doesn't matter, but it won't look very good on a larger screen. The other solution is to increase the padding with each device size, but that takes a lot of time and effort. So setting this maximum width here is much more efficient. And in terms of specifying the width, Tailwind goes from extra small, or XS, to 7XL, in addition to a few other settings that you would typically get in pure CSS. So you can choose what will be the most appropriate for you. But for a header, a nav bar like this, I usually go for a 7XL. And then the flex container is just flex and flex row. We want to align items to the center, so item center, and justify between for spacing out the items. There we go. Now the form. Width, a third, MX auto, border, rounded large, that's what LG stands for, large, gives you a radius of 8px, and we want the border to be purple. Now, Tailwind gives you various shades for a range of colors, so purple 700 is a darker purple, and the shade goes from 50 to 100 to 200 to 300 and so on until 900, and then it's 950, and it stops there. 50 would be the lightest shade, and 950 would be the darkest shade. And the RGB numbers you see on the left is taken from the exact shade of Tailwind's purple 700. So that's how I know it's purple 700. You can also add your own custom colors, and I'll show you the easiest way to do this a bit later. And for our input, it'll be width full, px4, py2, rounded top left large, and rounded bottom left BL large. For our button, it'll be py2, px4, BG or background color, purple 700, text white, rounded top right large, rounded bottom right large. That's it. That's how the pure CSS translates into Tailwind CSS. And this nav tag here, we don't need to do anything for now because we only have the sign in button here. But I'll add the light dark toggle later on, so we'll add a bit more styling to this later. I'll make the VS Code a bit bigger. Before we move on from the header, I just wanted to show you why it's a div nested inside a header tag. So if we give our header a background color here, you can see the entire background is now blue. But if we move the maximum width up to our header here, you see the blue background gets cut short. It only fills up to the maximum width that we've set. That's not what we want, and it doesn't look good. So we solve this issue by adding a new div within the header. And that's it. That's all for the header. Let's practice what we know for the footer. Skeleton first, so overarching footer tag with a div inside. Then a link and another div holding the texts refund policy, assuming you're selling something, privacy policy, and terms of use. These will most likely be links to other pages. Since we don't have the pages yet, I'm using p tags for now. And in terms of the styling, I'm just going to look at the pure CSS sheet and type out what they are in Tailwind CSS. Great, that's it. Easy, right? The blue input outline that you see here is a default Tailwind setting. We can override it by changing it to none or a different color. You can do this by saying focus : outline purple 700. So if we click on the input box now, that outline is the same color as the border color, whereas it used to be blue. So that's all. Now for responsiveness, in pure CSS, you have to have separate media queries for different device sizes. In my eyes, it's so much easier with Tailwind CSS. For example, this subscription form doesn't show up very well on mobile devices. What we can do is set it to hidden first, and starting from a medium-sized device, we want to begin seeing this little input field and button. So we write MD, which stands for medium, and then colon before the flex. So the display is hidden until it reaches a medium-sized device, which then changes the display into flex, so it's no longer hidden. On medium-sized devices, the width of the form seems a bit too short. You can't really see the input placeholder text. And we can change this by doing MD colon width half and apply LG, which stands for large, to the width 1/3. So that it will be wider for the medium-sized devices and slightly narrower for the larger-sized devices. Much better. I also want to change this H1 title text so that it aligns to the center, and that's just text-center. And then the footer. On a small device, I want the policies and terms and conditions to align vertically so we can read it better. Okay. I'm happy with the responsiveness of the header and footer now. We can move on to the bonus round, the light and dark mode toggle. I use a little library called Next.js. You can see it's a small package, lots of weekly downloads, and easy to use. Because we're using AppRouter, how we use it will look slightly different to the instructions given, but it's still fairly simple. I'll copy the installation instructions here and install it for my project. Once we have it, first we want to have a new folder called theme. In it, we will have a file called lightdarkprovider.tsx. Because this will be a client-side component, with the new app router, we have to specify use client at the top here. We import the theme provider from Next Themes. Then export function. We will want to use the React children prop, so we introduce it in this way. Then return theme provider tags with children inside. Within the theme provider tag, we need to set enable system to true and attribute to class. Similarly, in our tailwind.config file, we need to add dark mode, colon, and class as a string. That's it. We don't need this config file after this update, so we can close it. Now, in our layout file inside our body tag, if we wrap our header, children, and footer inside our light-dark provider component, press save, and you see that our screen immediately jumped to dark mode. That's very exciting, but fairly useless if we can't toggle it. So let's work on the toggle function now. In our components folder, let's add another folder called toggle. Inside the toggle folder, we can add a file called lightdarktoggle. Shorthand RAFCE to add this little template structure. So we need to add use client at the top here. We get the system theme, and set theme from Next Themes use theme hook. Remember to import it from Next Themes first though. We We also need a mounted and set mounted state. Because of how Next.js's server-side rendering works, until mounted on the client, the theme will always be undefined, which will throw a hydration error and cause the whole project to collapse. What this means is that we need to delay the rendering of any theme toggling UI until mounted on the client. It sounds somewhat complex, but it's actually really easy to do because we have React useEffect. We can set up useEffect, and once it's loaded for the first time, we set mounted to true, like this. If it's not mounted, we return null, so nothing happens. Otherwise, we return our toggle UI, which we will carry out shortly. Just one more little setup before we start the UI. And that's this little conditional operator, whereby if theme is equal to system, current theme is equal to the system theme preference. Otherwise, it's just theme with its default value, which we can see is currently dark. Now, once mounted in our div, we can have conditional rendering. If current theme is dark, we will have a button that says light to indicate that if you click on the button, it will change into light mode. If the current theme is not dark, we'll have a button that says dark, so the user can change it into dark mode. So that we can see it, if we go to our header file, we can remove this comment now and add our light dark toggle like this. We'll want it to align horizontally, and we can do this via flexbox. Item center gap 4. Now let's add some functionality to these buttons. On click of the light button, we set the theme to light as a string or in lowercase. And on click of the dark button, we set the theme to dark. If we click on the button now, of course we'll want icons or images or illustrations as opposed to text. I've got a sun SVG and a moon SVG. So I'll create a folder within the public folder and call it toggle. Inside it, I'll add the sun and the moon and copy across the SVG files respectively. By the time the video is out, I will have made this repo public, so you can grab it from my GitHub repo, link below. And back in our light dark toggle file, instead of this text, we can replace it with our sun illustration. To use the next image, we'll need a source. Some alt text, which we should always have with an image anyway. And we'll also need a specific height and width, which I will put as 20 by 20. And exactly the same with our moon illustration. There we go. The alignment is a bit off. We can fix it by adding flex and justify center to the top div here. And we want a nice little circle behind the sun and the moon, right? So it stands out a bit more. We can do this, say for the sun button, by setting the background to a darker slate color. And we want it to be circular, so we set rounded to full with a padding of 2 to give some space around the sun. On hover, we want the background color to be slightly lighter than this. Okay, that looks good. Similarly with the moon, we can give the background color a lighter shade of slate. And on hover, the shade can become a bit darker. Let's see it now. Oh, that looks great! Let's test it for responsiveness and how it works with smaller devices. That's fine, isn't it? Yeah, it's good. We do have a warning here. That's because theme provider for Next themes does two things, both on the server and on the client. One is to add a class to the HTML tag, and two, it adds a style attribute color scheme to the HTML tag. It's just a warning, so it doesn't stop the functionality of the toggle, but we don't like seeing the warning signs, do we? So we have to address this in a bit. Before then, let me quickly show you how to utilize the dark mode with Tailwind CSS. For example, for our H1 title, all we need to do is say dark, : and add what we want it to look like in the dark mode. So dark text purple 400 will show up like this. In the light mode, the text color is black. In the dark mode, the text color is purple. Similarly, in our input field in our header file, if we say dark, we want the background color to be slightly lighter than this. This is what happens. Without, with. That looks really good. Let's tackle this error now. There are two ways. The simplest way is to suppress the hydration warning. We can do this by going into our layout file, and inside our HTML tag, we just add suppress hydration warning here. If we refresh it, the warning is gone. However, suppressing the hydration warning is not ideal. The warning is to inform the developer that there is a server and client mismatch, so the server and client are rendering different content. That is good to know. There are only rare occasions where it's very hard or impossible to guarantee an exact match. For example, certain circumstances involving timestamps. What the React documentation says is that it only works one level deep and shouldn't be overused. I'll add the link to the documentation in the description below. I take that to mean that we should always try to avoid setting a suppress hydration warning to true. And here's an alternative way to resolve that warning. It works by adding class and style into the HTML tag so that it then renders on both the server side and client side so it matches up, and then syncing the theme preference with cookies. I saw this solution on the GitHub thread. I'll link it below. It works pretty well, so I thought I'd share it with you. Let's get rid of the suppress hydration warning first so we can see the error again. We add a function called getTheme up here. In this function, const cookie store equals cookies, which we need to import from Next headers. Then we get the theme from our cookie store like this. This will be called theme cookie. If there is a theme cookie, then the theme is that value. Otherwise, the theme is dark. Down here within our root layout, we grab the theme from our getTheme function. In our HTML tag, class name is theme, and color scheme style is also theme. Alright, that should get rid of the server and client mismatch warning for the HTML tag. To ensure that the server and client themes match up, we've got a bit more work to do. In our light dark provider file, within our theme provider here, we need to add storage key equals theme. This comes with the Next theme package and basically utilizes local storage to store the selected theme. Then in our light dark toggle file, in our light button, where we have onClick set theme to light, if we set the cookie below it, so document.cookie equals theme being the current theme, path equals /, and do the same for the dark button. We still get the light dark mismatch. Alright, what we can do inside the onClick is if current theme is dark, the new theme will be light, else it's dark. And instead of current theme for the cookie, it's new theme instead. If we refresh it now, no warning. Great! That's the header, footer, and light and dark mode components for a quick intro to Next.js and TailwindCSS. And I hope the byproduct is knowing flexboxes are not that scary. Next time we'll do some work with grids. Alright, see you next time.